Now, let's talk about Rishi Sunak. He made the Sunday Times Rich List this week, 730 million quid in his family's coffers. He's the richest British politician of all time, and there are now serious suspicions that a man of such immense wealth is having problems getting in touch with what the cost of living crisis means to so many millions of cash-strapped Brits. He is not handling this situation well. He has yet to come up with anything significant to help people through these financially difficult times. He's got to come up with something very soon, because a vast poll in yesterday's Daily Mail revealed that unless he is seen to help poor people in these tough times, the Tories are on course to lose the next election. He needs to raise his game, doesn't he, James?
He does. He's been asleep at the wheel. I mean, if you look at, I know there's, discussions about windfall tax, which he's part of, but increased national insurance. The cost of living crisis isn't a surprise. It's been coming down the tracks for quite some time in terms of supply chain issues, aspects about quantitative easing, inflation. So this is just not something that's just arrived yesterday. He knew about this, and yet the last budget was just rhetoric. A few little tinkerings of measures, but nothing of substance. We're now facing a crisis where people are having a zero-sum game choice about putting food on the table or turning on their lights. Electricity bills are going through the roof. There's an issue about pricing within a lot of the companies as well. Meanwhile, our Chancellor isn't doing anything about it. Based on, it's not just the Chancellor, it's some of parts of this government. When there's a crisis, they all act surprised and they don't have measures in place. What we should have actually right now is a cost of living plan, almost like a separate budget to deal with this. But nothing's happened. And the wealth is almost irrelevant. The optics don't look good. But a good chancellor, a chancellor that's remembered well, is a chancellor that puts in effective measures to get us out of tough times. And he hasn't done that. And it's going to be difficult for him to come back. He was the golden boy of the Tory party, about a year ago? Possible future Prime Minister? I'm not so sure now.
I certainly don't think he's going to make the top job at any time soon because the pressure is on him. James, these are serious times. As I say, the cost of living crisis is very real for millions of cash-strapped Brits. It's actually even becoming very real for the government. I think even Boris is starting to realise he's got a massive problem on his hands here. And yet, what are we seeing in the papers? What are the papers full of? Whether or not Boris had a meeting with Sue Gray about her damn report. I don't even want to see the thing anymore. I mean, how much longer is this thing going to be delayed? Is it really the sword of Damocles hanging over the Prime Minister's head? I don't really think so. And yet we hear that many top civil service servants might be named, many Downing Street figures might be named in the various new fines that have been given out. Why are we diverted into this cul-de-sac of nonsense about parties in Downing Street? How has this Prime Minister managed to get himself and indeed this country into such a mess that he can't concentrate on the things that matter?
Yeah, I think it's about bad optics. We've talked about this before. It doesn't look good having parties when everyone else is in lockdown, setting the rules and they weren't adhering to them themselves and keeping a vibrant hospitality industry going in Downing Street, but not anywhere else. But I think the important thing with this, Kevin, is it sums up this government. They're taking care of themselves, clinking glasses and jollies and, having lavish lifestyles. But they're not taking care of the very thing they're supposed to do, us, the people. There's a cost of living crisis on their watch. They haven't got solutions to that. Now, there's very few governments survive a cost of living crisis or an economic crisis. We're at that point where people have lost faith in this government. They don't trust this government. And again, the only thing that's keeping them afloat, even though they're beginning to sink a bit in the polls, the only thing that's keeping them afloat is a lack of opposition. If there was an effective opposition right now, this government would be toast. They would literally be running down the clock in a fag-end government for the next 2 years till the next general election. But they've still got skin in the game because there isn't effective opposition. We have the worst government and the worst opposition at exactly the worst time. And the public, we've given up on our politicians. There's a sense of apathy, and that's not a particularly good thing for democracy. What we need is basically the country to look at a set of politicians from whatever party and go, do you know what? They get us. They get what our concerns are. But right now, none of them do. And I'd be interested to know what the voter turnout will be in the next election. Based on the local elections, which are never particularly high anyway, there is a sense of apathy. It's like we've given up on our politicians, and that is a dangerous place to be.
And it also seems at times that Labour has given up criticising the government, or at least given up criticising the government effectively. What is going on with Keir Starmer? Obviously, he's got his Beergate problems, but the government is beset with enormous, monumental problems that it's not getting to grips with. Labour should be making hay with this. Labour should be way ahead in the public opinion polls. It should be making life hell for Boris and his cabinet, and yet you barely hear them. What is wrong with Labour, James?
They just don't connect. I mean, Starmer's not got much charisma. You know, he's focusing on the wrong issues. He hasn't defined himself yet. I mean, for all Jeremy Corbyn's faults, he defined himself over and over again. He paradoxically actually lost the election because he didn't define himself on one issue, Brexit. But he did on everything else. Starmer, I have no idea what he stands for. And I think that's a sort of common theme across the country. But there's loads of open goals here. What would be great, if it's not the government, is for Keir Starmer to say, this is my plan to deal with the cost of living crisis on every single issue, whether it's utilities, whether it's to do with inflation, whether it's to do with wages, whether it's to do with manufacturing and industrial strategy, which is, I think, a root of a lot of evil over the last 30 years because we don't really have one anymore. All we get is things like the government saying Northern Powerhouse, but nothing gets done. And Labour, who are literally defining themselves by their very lack of definition about themselves. So the public are looking at this. They're looking at a government I think has been in power too long. A 12-year term is far too long for any government. They run out of steam. But normally what happens is over that time, the opposition learns from their mistakes from losing previous elections. But this one, they haven't learned a thing. We have no idea what they stand for. I mean, going back with the John Major era, that government had lost any form of momentum, especially after Black Wednesday. Yeah. But then you had the Blair era ready to come in. They looked like a government in waiting at that time. Labour don't. And so we're left with literally, you know, two cheeks of the same backside, where we've got parties who they're not offering anything in terms of the opposition, and a government that really give off the impression that they're more concerned about their own interest in survival and power, but they don't have a blueprint to get this country through this crisis.